Welcome to Eastlake. We are an inclusive faith community dedicated to the free search for truth and meaning, seeking to live out a more just and life-giving spirituality in the modern world. We see faith as less about doctrines and dogmas demanding total agreement, but a life to be lived, enjoyed, and given away to others. What unites us is a growing awareness that life is a gift and love is the point. We welcome the entire human family, regardless of race, age, creed, physical abilities, marital or economic status, gender identity, or sexual orientation. So if you are curious and have come to see, if you are tired and have come to rest, if you are grateful and have come to share, if you are journeying and have come to grow, if you are wounded and have come to heal, if you are joyful and have come to shine, welcome home. Today, Peter Gadd and Kristen Burchinal talk with Brit Barron as they wrap up our series, A Conversation About Race. Please check the description for links to our quarterly Spotify playlist and guided meditation.
Well, hey everyone, it's Kristen and Peter and Brit Barron here.
Hello.
We're so excited to be able to have this conversation with you after 3 weeks of listening to you talk. Peter and I have been going back and forth with, I want to talk to her about this. No, I want to talk to her about that. What do we have? It's just been, I feel like your messages were so helpful. There was so much information. I love the illustrations when you're always like, I'm sorry I keep doing this to you guys, but imagine this. I'm like, no, the imagination is where things actually stick and land. So thank you so much for just the way you've put all this together. It's been really helpful.
Yeah, thank you.
I also love that you mentioned the Rainbow Bridge at one point.
Yeah, I know.
Well, so Peter and I just want to kind of start by, besides just thanking you for your effort, we just have things kind of about ideas of things that you've talked about kind of in order of week 1, week 2, week 3 that we just want to kind of dive into and get some more information on, get your opinions on things and kind of hear from you whether or not we kind of received what you were saying in the way that you intended. For me, I think the river analogy was really helpful. Like you can jump in and try to start pulling stuff out, or you can actually walk upstream and see what's going on. And then when you see what's going on, I think is where, because I think it gets a lot harder when you start to, like you said, it's very, very few things come down to an event between one person and another person. There's always something kind of behind it. And I guess my question for you is, once you look through like what you talked about, racist ideas, racist power, I found myself getting more discouraged about the power and the ideas. And I was wondering, is that the point of doing that exercise in your brain to get down to how big the issue really is? Is that the point? And then also then it feels like when I look at racist power in a situation that I've seen, I just feel like even more helpless with what am I supposed to do about that?
Yeah. I mean, the point is not despair, but it is to, and so that's hopefully the journey, and we'll get to that point where it's big and then impacts us as individuals, and then us as individuals can sort of go back and impact the big. But initially, I think the point of that is to realize how big it is. And I think the point of that for me is twofold. One, I really, really just want us to stop talking about this and thinking about it as an individual issue, thinking of oh, well, I'm not racist, so it's not a problem, right? It's in with climate stuff, right? Well, I don't have an oil rig, so not my problem, right? We're all on this planet. So we're all a part of this system. And so understanding how big it is important to understand the fact that one, you play a role in it, whether you want to be playing a role in it or not. It has impacted you, whether you have tried to be impacted or not. And it's a little bit, I see how it could be discouraging, but it's also meant to be like, okay, we'll take a little bit of the pressure off of like, I'm not coming at like you, Peter, like you could like to say like, are you this? It's to say like, hey, we've all been impacted. This is huge, right? This has hit all of our lives, and we need to have that framework. And then I think some of the best leaders that we have seen and learned from in anti-racism work, Martin Luther King Jr.'s and Octavia Butler's, and all these people, that a lot of them have written things like, I'm planting seeds for trees I'll never sit under. And MLK even famously said, like, you know, I've seen the mountaintop, but I may not get there with you. Like, just understanding, hey, this is, even I understand, like, I don't think I will see the resolve of this in my lifetime. I hope to be a part of planting a seed for a tree someone else will get to sit under. And I think there's some health to that in understanding, like, hey, yeah, like you're going to go after this, you're going to fight for this, we're going to turn the tide, but probably not in our lifetime. And we're reaping the benefit of people's work to get us to where we are. And we hope to get people in the next generation to a next part. And I think sometimes as Americans in particular, that's an uncomfortable idea of like, you know, we're dropping more seeds, we're watering plants, but like, we may not see this tree, but that the work is still valuable and worth it. It took hundreds of years to build the system. It's not going to come down in a day. And that's not meant to be discouraging. That's meant to be like, okay, do we have a vision for future generations? Do we have a vision for what it looks like to participate in, you know, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. Do we have, can we hold that, right? And I think that's a lot of the difficulty when you start to realize like, whoa, okay, I'm not going to read one book and then be like, wow, I did it. Yeah.
I graduated.
Yeah. Okay, next. Yeah.
I'm curious, are you optimistic? I mean, it has to be this combination, right? Of like realistic, like we have to face the realities of George Floyd's situation, or just whatever other situation that George Floyd is an example of after example of racist acts. But are you optimistic that there's progress when it comes to some of the ideas being less well accepted, or that the policy is improving? Like even down to the power level, like do you feel like those in power, like the percentage of people in power or percentage of systems that are powerful are less racist than they were 100 years ago? Do you feel like that is bending towards justice currently? Or do you feel like there's still a lot of work? I mean, obviously there's a lot of work to go, but do you still feel optimistic at some level?
Yeah, I do. Totally. And I think, you know, it was really wild summer of 2020. Like there hasn't been that many people like galvanized towards this specific movement in, you know, 60, 70 years. In my lifetime, at least, there hasn't been. And that was incredible. I mean, the reality that like, when's the last time like Eastlake did an anti-racism series, right? So I think there's a lot of hope in that. And, you know, I think that the power one is always going to be the hardest one to shift, right? Because, you know, there's a reason that, you know, I think in every ancient tradition, one of the things we are most warned about is power. And I think there's a reason. It's a tough tide to turn, but I do feel optimistic. I think we're seeing a lot of progress, and that doesn't mean take your foot off the gas, but I certainly feel optimistic. And as a, you know, natural Enneagram 7, I'm always looking for a little bit of hope. But I hope, you know, it's cool to even be having these conversations with so many people, and to see the kind of books that are on the New York Times list, and to see, okay, like people are engaging in. And I've always said, like, I think one of the functions of white supremacy or racist power is to keep a lot of people ignorant to the reality of what's going on. Because I think if a lot of people knew, they would care. But you can go a long time like living in this country and in this society, in this world, and not know. Not because you're even like covering your own eyes, but because your eyes are being covered. And so I think there's a lot of awakening happening. And I think that's very hopeful.
Yeah. I'm curious on the iceberg metaphor. So I love it. One, I think it's helpful. But my takeaway from it is that racism is a lot more nuanced than just the tip of the iceberg, which is racist action, right? So it sounds as if I'm hearing you right, the big hope or the big takeaway that you want for those of us listening was to not make it so simple and to make it so, did I, use a racial slur today? Or did I go discriminate against somebody who was a different race? No, then I am not racist. So it's to recognize that I might be actively accepting racist ideas that I might be blind to that, or I might be participating in racist systems that benefit me that I'm not even aware of. So to help me kind of have a little bit more nuanced view of the topic. Is that it? Or is there more to it than that?
That's pretty much it, right? That's to get that realization beyond, okay, well, I didn't, do harm. Like I've never participated in violence and I've never, used these words. But then the reality is no. Like we are all in this. This is much bigger than we think and nuanced. And again, that's not even to, sometimes I say, I don't know if I said this in the videos, but that racist has become such a pejorative term.
Yes.
When I feel like it should almost just be more descriptive, right? Like you probably are racist because, right, how massively this iceberg and these systems have impacted our culture and our society, and sort of, sometimes I talk about racism, racism, nationalism, and Christianity as like a braid that braided in your hair, and then we slept on it for 400 years, and now it's all matted together, and sort of get it. And some of those things are just that's our work in understanding it. We need to take a little bit of the defensiveness out of well, I never. It's okay, chill with that. Mm-hmm. You live in a society that actively participates in this. What's your role? Can you fix your vision to start to see it? And then we can sort of move forward.
Yeah. I think it's important that you put ignorance with violence and hate, because I think it is really simple to be I'm not violent. I don't hate people, but ignorance is something that you have to be more careful to say that's not part of who I am, because I think that's one of the things that your work is highlighting for people, is that just sometimes it is ignorance. We don't realize the depth and pervasiveness of this in the system that we were born into. Like you said, the treadmill, the sidewalk that we're on.
And I'm you don't know what you don't know. Yeah. So
someone has to point it out.
And then when you know it is when you become responsible for it, right? I'm not going to go back and pull up everyone's old tweets, but now when you know, and can we move forward, right?
Yeah. I was on week 2, when you talked about power and privilege, you started off the conversation by talking about white privilege. And you talked about how, just want to make sure, I want to clarify, what this means is not that white people haven't suffered or that you haven't endured hardship, but that, your race hasn't contributed to that to exacerbate it even further, is kind of what I heard you say. And I guess the thing that I just was thinking about is I wanted to ask you, how does it feel that you kind of have to placate the white fragility at the beginning of your talk to make sure people stay with you? I just was oh, I wish you didn't even have to be it's okay. I'm not, I just was, Peter and I were talking too about, you were saying, Peter, white men in particular, there's a defensiveness. There's the potential for defensiveness. And I feel Brit, you're so gracious in acknowledging that and dealing with that. And I just wondered how that felt. Are you annoyed? Does it bother you that you have to do that?
Hold my hand. Peter, you're not racist, but other people might be.
Yes and no. So I think it's always twofold in the way I see it, right? Because there is And I want to be
it's okay.
calculated in the way I say this, but so white fragility is real, and it's a part of the issue. And white people are also human beings who I think we can hold both, and we haven't done a great job at that. So I have a lot of critique on both conservatives and progressives. And I think both of those critiques come down to not allowing people to be more than one thing. And so I think on the progressive end, sometimes when we talk about white people and their fragility and their sensitivity, it comes down to like that, that they are like whiny white people who like can't get on board. And I could understand that sort of idea of like, well, why is it always, God, we got to hold your hand through everything, we got to do this. On this other end, it's like, we're good people, don't come at us, like don't attack, all these things. And I think it's actually a middle ground where I can understand the frustration, and I get frustrated with like very slowly explaining racism sometimes to people when it's something that feels so fundamental to who I am. And at the other time, I can acknowledge that I'm talking to human beings who have nuanced human experiences. And so not many people, regardless of who you are, respond well to like you're not good or you're perfect. Like neither of those are real, like neither of those are true. And so how can we hold both to say like, no, your whiteness has created a space for you to feel sensitive, especially in this current conversation. Your whiteness has created a barrier, and that has been like sort of confirmed, and there's some good things about that, but there's also some hard things about that. And so ultimately it comes down to half me as an anti-racism trainer, half me as a person of color, and me as all these things, and then ultimately me as a communicator to say, well, if I'm trying to have a conversation, what can I do to make this conversation successful? And I say this a lot, I do not think in any way, shape, or form it's people of color's job to explain racism to white people. However, personally, as someone who grew up in white spaces and I feel like speaks the language and has done these, I've just decided and committed of like, these are conversations that I'm personally willing to have. I wouldn't put that on anyone else. And so if I'm going to do that, then I'm going to try to do it in a way that can be successful. And so is it annoying? I don't know if annoying is the right word, but I think it's just true. Right. I think if you come out the gate, or if I came out the gate swinging in a different way, and ultimately it is true what I believe also. Like it's not, I think that's what's hard sometimes for white people when we talk about white privilege. They're like, no, my grandma has cancer, and you're like, yeah, no, like no one's saying like nothing's been hard for you. But if that's your idea of like, well, I don't have privilege because my life has been hard, then someone needs to reframe that idea for you so you can see that. And so, I mean, long way around saying, sure, it's frustrating, and it's also what's the reality of where we are, right? And I've sort of never been personality, disposition, a number of things, a come out of the gate swinging kind of person. And I'm always down to have a conversation about how nuanced we are as humans. And I understand that about as a person of color and as a white person. And I'm always down to acknowledge that, right? Because at the end of the day, that's, if you don't transform your pain, you transmit your pain. So I don't want angry anybody, right? I want people to be free. And so like, how can we get there? Is a lot of my brain space.
Hey everyone, it's Kristen. Just wanted to take a moment to say thank you for tuning in. I hope that you're finding these messages helpful for you in your everyday life. That's what we're trying to do here, is gather around the idea that life is a gift and love is the point, and let's give ourselves ways to move forward in that in our own everyday world. So I wanted to take a moment to say thank you for being a part of this community. To those of you who have participated and given financially, we want to say thank you to you. Everything that we do here happens because people make contributions. People say, I value this place, I want it to exist for me and for other people, and so I'm going to support it. And so we just want to say how grateful we are that you do that. And for those of you who maybe haven't had a chance to contribute yet, we would ask you to consider maybe doing so. If you find this place beneficial, if you find these messages helpful for you, then consider joining us in that way. You can go to eastlakecc.com to make a contribution, and we just always are thankful for the people who want this place to exist. So thanks again for tuning in. Let's get back to the message.
I really appreciated that. The second week talking through white privilege. I think it is, like you said, it's maybe a necessary evil, right? Like how else are you trying, if you're trying to help people, and the way to help people be open to new ideas is to hopefully lower defensiveness. I find the defensiveness around race among peers of mine. So I'm Kristen referenced that I was saying this earlier, that I just have a lot of conversations with white dudes. I have a lot of white dudes in my life, and the topic in general of race tends to just trigger defensiveness, right? White privilege as a term at its core for many white guys can just be, it's a triggering term now, whether right, wrong, or indifferent. That's for many people's experience of that term. And so I appreciated kind of how you explained it. The quote that stuck with me, I think that I'd heard over the years is that privilege, when you've lived in privilege, equality feels like oppression. So this idea of, for what I think, like my normal everyday experience, I didn't call that privilege, but for somebody else, that would have been a privilege. And I wasn't aware of it, right? So I'm waking up to, I think my experience isn't everybody else's experience. So I think you did a great job speaking to that. I think my hope for our listeners would be to, like you said, tone down the defensiveness and just listen, without assuming attack, right? Personal attack, right? I think we often interpret white privilege as a personal attack on you, or at least this is my experience with some of the other guys that I'm talking to. So I was thinking too you said ignorance, violence, and hate, right? In week one, Kristen, you referenced that. I do think being potentially called ignorant, or being told that that you might be racist, like you said, you want it to be descriptive, but obviously that's a term nobody calls himself ignorant, right? Like it's the whole bias piece of the human experience. Nobody ever says, hey, are you like irrational? People are like, no, I'm rational. Everybody's rational. And nobody is ignorant. And like, it's the whole stat of 90% of drivers say they're above average drivers, right? So it's the human bias that's, I think, contributing to, the defensiveness too, because it's embarrassing to like have to admit, oh, maybe I am ignorant on this topic, right? Or it's embarrassing to say, maybe I am open to systemic, privilege or racist ideas that have benefited me. It's like embarrassing to have to say that. So I guess my just encouragement, and this isn't really a question for you, Brit, but maybe I just want to say sorry that we're defensive on the topic, and sorry that you have to make some disclaimers. But I'm hopeful that the more frequent lead that we being just white people in general, but maybe I could just share for myself personally, I'm hopeful that I've grown less defensive the more I hear from people who think differently than me, or that have had a different experience than me. And the less defensiveness I get, less defensive I feel, because I don't feel like you're personally attacking me or trying to help me understand your experience. So anyways, I just appreciated what you shared on that.
Yeah, no, I think that's completely accurate. And I think, so much of it is everyone's own work. And if there's ways in which we are all privileged, there's ways in which we are oppressed. And it's, I think some of the, I don't want to say popularity, but the way that race is in a conversation right now is really fueling a lot of people think. I said something, this is a few weeks ago, and I said something And my friend, so my wife and I, our two best friends are another gay couple, or two boys though. And I said something and they were like, that's homophobic. And I was like, what? And then I was like, oh my God. It totally, like, it just was like, I mean, I just have these, like, you know, and here I am, like, doing those things, but I'm like, those growing up in the church and all of these years of this, you know, yeah, granted, I've been like unpacking it all and deconstructing it all and breaking it all down for maybe 5-6 years, but that doesn't account for the 30 that, you know, it was like, and sometimes those little roots pop up and I say something and I'm like, I just said that. I said that because I spent years and years and years in an environment, like 30 years in an environment. I've spent 6 years outside of that environment. So to think that that foundation is just like, as soon as I was like, oh, you know, I'm gay now, like now I don't have any of that previous baggage. Like I do. And when we can sort of understand that and be less defensive of like, man, I don't know how, like, the work I've done to undo some of those ties, but I still don't know how long they're gonna probably pop up, you know, and I, you know, say something really evangelical and I'm like, I just start singing Tomlin as I'm walking down the street, you know, I don't know, those songs are still in my head. I still know all the words, you know, and that's, you know, that's the vibe. You can, you know, you're going to decide like, hey, I want to take my journey into racism, but some of those songs are still in your head, you know, all the words, and it's a journey.
That reminds me of the Pete Holmes bit. Pete Holmes grew up Christian as well. He talks about the paint can with the little ball clacking around. He's like, there's always, that ball is Christianity. It's always clacking around. It makes noises sometimes when we don't want it to.
Sometimes I'm just like, man, the hell better not be real, you know.
I have a question that's related. I think it's refreshing or encouraging. Thanks for sharing that, because I think even when in your third talk you speak to hopefully having more grace for mistakes, and like that we're going to fail through this, which I think is, maybe we'll get to that as we keep moving through. But one of the questions that I had, just kind of wanted to understand your interpretation. You talked about difference, and you talked about essentially, you said the minute you begin to other someone, eventually that leads towards violence, right? So othering is this beginning process that eventually ends with violence. And I kind of wanted just to understand maybe the difference between difference and othering. So like, Brit, you and I are different, right? We aren't the same. How do we embrace or like value each other's difference without me othering you? Like what would be the differences there? And I know that's hard because I'm using the word difference, difference as an idea, but how is it different than othering?
Right. So I think other implies a norm, that there's a normal, right? So we're different, but one of us is not normal and one of us is not normal.
Abnormal.
That's so hard. Yeah, okay. That was like, wait, I think there's a word for this. And I think that's the nuance between othering or just being, we're not the same. But the issue is that we have normalized some ways of being and presenting and existing, and othered, right? And I think that's the nuance there, right? Is yes, you know, you have this, I have this, you live here, you look like this, you look this, all those are differences. But if we say, well, and Peter's normal and Brit's different, other, that's where we sort of get into those things. And one little language thing I've been trying to use in my own life is sort of almost trying to replace different with unfamiliar, which is helpful for my own brain of, okay, are they different? That experience is unfamiliar to me, right? Or especially with a lot of gender, which is where my current brain is expanding in my experiences with people I love and trying to better understand. I think making that nuance of like, okay, this is unfamiliar to me, but I'm happy and I'm, you know, lucky to be engaging in something that is hopefully going to make it more familiar to me and my community. But I would say the problem isn't that we have differences. The problem is that there's a normal.
Yeah, that's helpful. I think even that word normal may be one that we need to be careful to use. And I wonder, is there a better recommendation on like just as like an alternative word for normal? Because I do think normal does presume like this is the default, and then there's the rest. And so, is there a better term? Familiar? Is that like?
That's what I've been working like familiar and unfamiliar of like, oh, this food is very familiar to me, or this is very, because it's true, right? It's what we normalize is what is familiar, right? And so,
I like that.
I thought you did a really good job of just explaining that power and privilege rests on that idea that white is normal and everything else is other. And I appreciated your specifics about like Band-Aids and crayons and Target and the hair. But I think my question about that, when you were talking about the multicultural hair care section in Target, my question for you is, I just want to make sure I'm understanding it. Like, does having a multicultural hair care section in Target, does that further the idea of other, or is it finally we have like what we need? I was trying to figure out where you were on that. Does that make sense? My question?
Yeah, totally. So I think the fact that we have a multicultural hair section furthers this othering idea.
Yeah.
We need those hair care products. But having that specific label different, even though all the other aisles have different products. So like, you red hair, you blonde, are you natural blonde? Is it fake blonde? Is your hair thinning? Is it gray? So all these nuances are still just under hair. There's just
hair care. Yeah.
You find your own, right? You say like, hey, I can find my own way in the aisle because I know I have red hair or whatever. But the fact that we're still pointing out, okay, all this is still normal hair, even with all these variations. And then we're going to point out this section is for other kind of hair.
That's what I took from it. But I wanted to make sure that I was understanding that, because I remember seeing all of the, like, there were social media posts about Band-Aids and crayons and things like that. And I just want to make sure I understood it from the perspective of someone who, like, I did never notice Band-Aids, that never occurred to me. It's a part of the ignorance. So anyway,
just being reminded too that like you're wearing a white person's Band-Aid is just something that I'd never thought about in my life. But it's just waking up to it when you see it. Like, that doesn't make sense at all, right? Why are you wearing Peter Gadd colored Band-Aid? That makes no sense at all, right?
And that's where, and there's a lot of places that we could sort of see those nuance. And I think I talked about this in the video, but the sort of the biggest red flag we have, right, is who's American and who's American with a hyphen, right?
Yeah.
So you are American and I'm African American, Korean American, Mexican American, right? We have this idea, like, if you close your eyes and I say, all right, we've got an all American family, who are you picking? And so or picturing, and then that just trickles all the way to, like, I don't know, you know what I mean? Pick a place in your life, and we'll find the roots of that idea,
Yeah. That's really helpful.
I think too, I was just like reflecting, like, don't you think that likely, and maybe push back on this, because again, this is hopefully a safe place, but Target probably put that section up thinking it was like helpful, right? But like thinking like this is a helpful section to provide products for people who aren't white or don't have traditional types of hair. But I think maybe it's unintentionally, like you're saying, like the intent maybe was trying, but it was missing the broader goal of not othering.
Sure, but so that's when the difference between impact and intent, I think, comes down to also the ideas that we've consumed that we may not even be aware. And that's why I'm always like pushing to the deeper thing, because it's like, sure, intentions, and then the impact was this, but have you realized that you've consumed the ideas that this hair care is somehow different than all the other kinds of different hair, right?
Yeah.
And so that's why it's always like, and I think intentions are complicated in every area of life, but especially in this, and people really struggle with impact versus intent. But I think it's fairly simple, especially if you keep deep diving down to what are the ideas you have consumed that have created these intentions, right? Of like, oh, I know what I'll do. Like I'll make, people feel welcome in my store. Well, why wouldn't they feel welcome? Or why do you, right? So that's, it's always pushing and pushing and pushing.
Peter, do you have I
think it's great. I was more just bringing that up because I think that still sounds like maybe that would be an example of ignorance, right? So you're not intending to you're trying to be helpful, but you're getting in the way. And I think that's a common thing. It seems like that's happening all the time, right? So I think having you pointed out, I think just is helpful. Others pointed out is helpful to recognize unintentional ways, because I think maybe that is even what is driving some of the defensiveness. Going back to an earlier discussion, is like this assumed you're doing this on purpose, and I think regardless of whether you're doing it on purpose or not, it's not helpful. So now let's focus not so much on whether you tried or you didn't try. Let's focus on what's the impact of the decision, what's the impact of the legislation, what's the impact of the idea. So,
and I think, to be honest, one of the hardest places that I've seen from my POV for white folks is not, there's a defensiveness to the learning sometimes and to the acknowledgement, but probably the hardest place to sort of feel recovered from or still want to engage is when I've seen white people in my life have the intent to do something and it is not correct. It is not an appropriate response. It is not those things. And then that's, well, I tried. And so I don't even know what could I, that kind of thing. And that's what's up, right? Someone probably sat in a meeting in Target and were like, hey, I'm doing a really cool thing, and then people are like, no, we hate it. Or Dove is like, no, it's a great idea. Like, this is a super progressive commercial. People are going to love it. And then they get destroyed on social media for it. And so I think that is almost I've seen, right, a harder place to recover from, because then you're like, well, then it doesn't matter what I do because no one's going to like it because I'm just a white person, blah, blah, blah. And that is the thing that you have to fight against, of like, oh, you are absolutely going to get it wrong. 1000%, 100%. There is a 0.0% chance you are going to enter into this conversation, into your own anti-racism work, into whatever it is, and get it right. That's just like an impossibility. And that's, I think, sometimes the harder thing to swallow. You like realize you have privilege, you recognize it, you see the systemic racism, you see these ideas that you've consumed, and you're like, okay, I'm gonna like be better. And then you fail and you get it wrong. And I think that is sometimes a harder place to come back from.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that was a really important thing that you said in that third message, because I do feel like there's kind of this, how I think of cancel culture right now, where like you say something wrong or you do something wrong and there's no coming back from it, is kind of what I take that to be. And I guess your comment made me feel hopeful. Like, can we all be as gracious as Brit? Can we all just be like, well, let's try it again, or let's not be discouraged by a mistake or feeling offended. I just think that's just our culture in general, where easily offended about all kinds of things. And I do think it's important to be able to just let down our personal guard about that, and to, I don't know, I guess, how do you address that? Just I'm asking both of you, like, the fear, you talked about the fear of being perceived as racist is sometimes a huge block that stands in the way. So.
Well, I mean, bottom line, I think I wonder all the time how much any of this conversation should be or even needs to be happening on the internet, which I think is very, very low. And because I think there's also, because you said like offended, I had a conversation with a friend recently, something a family member had said, and they were like, well, why are you so offended? And he's like, I'm actually not offended. Like my feelings are really hurt, you know? And I think there's just a lot of nuance there of, I think there needs to be accountability for things we did wrong, you know, like I want to apologize to all of the young girls that I spewed purity culture at when I was, you know, too young to be a pastor person. And there needs to be accountability for those things. And especially when we hurt people's feelings. And I feel like part of the issue is it's all become public. And so are we whole people, or are we the worst thing we've tweeted in the past 10 years? Right. And that, you know, I think we're a holistic people, and getting these conversations is a lot harder. And James Baldwin has a quote, and he says, I imagine the reason people cling so tightly to hate is because they fear once the hate is gone, they'll be forced to deal with pain. And I think that's where a lot of people sit. And I think that's what makes this so hard, is this shit is painful. Like it's so hard. It's easier just to be like, well, then I'm never changing, or I'm not listening to you, or than to deal with the pain of like, did I hurt people? Have I contributed to the ignorance and hate? Have I contributed to these things? If you people who have been racist for 60 years and then they just find it out, and they've treated people differently, and they told their kids that they weren't allowed to date people, and what do you do with all of that? That is extraordinarily painful. You know, I think about my own journey in evangelicalism, and being 30 and then sort of like breaking that down, but still even those 30 years of like, that's painful. Some of the things I participated in, knowing now how wrong I think they are. And it like is hard. That's hard. And that sucks. And that's the real work of some of this. And I don't even know if that can happen on the internet, or like anywhere near the internet, or I don't even know if that's what we're trying to get people to. I feel like we're kind of just exporting our own emotional labor onto strangers, and I don't know how healthy that is, but the idea of cancel culture, whatever, I'm like, well, I don't care, but are you going to deal and move through the pain of potentially hurting someone or contributing to these things in the world? And if you can, then I think you're going to be a force for good. But if you can't, I think you'll continue to perpetrate that, maybe in different areas and different avenues, but it has to be dealt with.
It's so good.
I think it's good. I appreciated in your last talk too, you kind of broke down what does anti-racism work look like, right? So if we're going to hop off the treadmill or the moving sidewalk and we're going to go the opposite direction, you kind of broke it down into 3 areas. I thought that was helpful: education, activism, relationships. I was even thinking like, how often in the last couple of years I've heard that it's not essentially it's my job to educate myself on racism, and it's my job to, like, as a white person specifically, like I shouldn't be outsourcing that on others. So you even doing this series and having a conversation with us, I hope you hear gratitude that I do think it is nice of you to do that, because I don't think it is your job. It might be your personal choice and your work in the world, but it certainly isn't an obligation. But I just found that as a helpful breakdown for me, because I do think the question that you hear all the time for something so big, the iceberg is huge, right? Once you stop just viewing it as, you know, did I do something racist today? And you recognize something a lot broader than that, the systems that are contributing to the policy. I think those things are really helpful. I think you said relationships are tricky with cancel culture. And I was kind of just curious, and I know you kind of spoke to it just a second ago with Christian's question, but like, do you feel like part of our role, I guess I go back and forth on this. So do you feel like if I'm trying to be anti-racist, is like, what is a helpful way, and maybe it's case by case, to like help others as well? So like, should it at some level, like, I guess I've had conversations with people where I've tried to help them be open to some of my ideas, whether it's maybe less defensiveness around racism, or like less certain about their Christianity, just in like less judgmental about people that aren't Christian, right? Because I have plenty of Christians in my life and plenty of white people in my life, right? So I've had those conversations, not on the internet. I've stopped doing any internet conversations. I've done more coffees and just gentle, like maybe some humor, maybe some like arm around, the shoulder, and like, it's okay. You don't need to stress about that as much, and sometimes they don't go well. And so like, is the point of like, I think maybe that's okay. Like, the goal isn't like that every single conversation is going to go well and I'm going to convert them to my correct idea. But I'm kind of just curious, like, to what degree is it my job to help others get on board with less racist ideas versus like deal with my own internal challenges? Because I do think it is at some level my job, right? Like, I can't just be like, well, I'm working on it personally and I'm letting other people be unhelpful for the world. Like, I feel like that's part of the activism too. So I'm just curious, like, how much do you think I should be helping others be more anti-racist?
Yeah, great question. And I think
it's a hard question, so I don't need a great answer, by the way.
I think the answer is always like sort of back to you. I think this is a funny, or, sometimes I'll get asked a lot, like very specific, like, hey, here's the deal. My uncle, here's, blah, blah, like, what should I say to him?
It's like, always an uncle.
I don't know. I'm like, yeah. I'm like, that's your uncle, girl. Like, I literally have never met him. I don't know what you should say to this man. I think it's that's our whole, far beyond anti-racism, that is our life, is we figure out our boundaries and our accountability to the people. I have spent so much money in therapy asking almost one singular question, which is, what is my responsibility to people just because we're related? I really want to know. Like, I need to know, like, lady, but that's the question, right? And I think we have to navigate when this work, like you said, and being gracious and feeling these things. There are times where I'm like, no, I'm not talking about racism anymore. I'm taking a break. Or I'm, only want to be around Black people for the next like 3 to 5 days. Or, actually I'm really open to these conversations and that didn't go well. Or, this conversation didn't go well, but I feel like I want to keep coming back to the table. Or this conversation didn't go well and that was triggering for, and that's not a relationship I can. Those are what we are always just navigating. I think our work is the only one that we can be continually committed to, and that will even change shape. And I think you have to just trust yourself. Like, when people ask me, like, should I be friends with queer people? Should I be still friends with my non-affirming people in my life? I'm like, I don't know. I don't know. Does it feel bad? Then no. Yeah. But do you feel hopeful and you want to work? I don't know. I don't think there's a rule book to any of this.
Yeah.
I think we should always be encouraging people to find freedom and healing in the ways that we found it. What that looks like, I have no idea.
Yeah, it has to be case by case. I think it's helpful though. Even that is a helpful response to me, because it's not just my values too. It's my values in relationship with that person, right? Because like, I might not keep coming back to the table with that person, but I will come back to the table with that person, keep engaging in that dialogue. And so it is very nuanced, but I like your response.
I think part of it too is like, the more work that you do on yourself, it comes out in your relationships. So part of it is like, I think the more you do your own internal work, the more you process things, the more you understand, the more you learn, that just will come out in your relationships and the conversations that you're having.
Easily. And I think that's, when I'm always, I feel like preaching this message, I'm like, your own internal and emotional health and maturity and healing will contribute to your understanding of how you interact with this world when it comes to our planet, when it comes to racism, when it comes to homophobia, when it comes to class, when it comes to all those issues. You know, even I found like my response, my openness, my understanding, so much of it rests in my work, right? As a person who needs to become emotionally whole and healthy and mature. And I say that sometimes. I mean, even my wife, right, is someone who just because of the circumstances of her life spent many years in therapy, like as a teenager. And because of that has this anti-racism, not that she always knew all of the language, but always had a good engagement, right? On any topic. She was willing to say like, do I have something to learn here? Or what do I need to know? Or what's this person's POV? And I think a lot of that comes just from our own work, you know, and where there's hysteria, there's history, right? It's something I've heard a lot. And so I think particularly with white men or people who like are defensive and, oh my God, you know, well, what's really going on? You know, like you need to talk about racism. You need to understand these facts. You need to understand these things, but also like, bro, there's a party that has not, you know, experienced the healing that it needs to be ready to engage in justice and transformative work in the world. And that's on you, you know?
Well, I think I love the way you ended that message, the final one about the work being tangible, hopeful, and serious.
Yeah.
And I felt like those were really like, I don't know if you wrote that down or if that's just the way that you decided to say it, like just in the moment. But I really felt like that was descriptive of what we're trying to do, something tangible, something hopeful, but it's also really serious. So I think I just want you to hear us say thank you. Thanks for sharing your point of view, for trying to be like, help people grow in this area. It's a challenge for sure. And I think I'm just really grateful for you, for your voice.
Oh, well, thank you.
Me too.
It's been fun to have this conversation and see and hear your perspectives. And I would encourage everyone. There's so many people of color, other white people, other anti-racism workers who have different POV than me. And, you know, it's all important, right, to understand the nuance that exists in this work and in our world. So, you know, there's lots out there.
I feel like I've also learned from you, like your TED Talk that you sent me and the course that you offer, this anti-racism course, right? Can you tell the people that are listening and watching a little bit about that? Or we can also link to it also.
Yeah, we will.
Yeah. So there's a course, there's one that's just a digital, like a workbook basically. And then there's one that has video. So it's like probably 2 hours video. If you're not tired of listening to me talk yet, you will be by the end of that. But to walk people through this in a little bit of a more extensive, deeper way. And then I have a TED Talk. You can find it on YouTube, just talking about sort of some of these same concepts. So if you wanted to dive a little deeper with me in your ear again, you can check that out.
That's the Beyonce one, right?
Yeah.
I love that one.
Yeah. I love Beyonce.
Okay, well, we will send those out too so people can join you on that part as well. Thanks so much for your time, Brit. It's always good to see you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brit. Appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us. To make a donation, head to eastlakecc.com/donate.